Hi, I'm Ken Kessler, and welcome to the Sounds of Christmas podcast. If you're new to this podcast, I want to start off by saying thanks for joining us. If you're not new, welcome back. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Now, to avoid any confusion, I want to start off by saying there won't be any music played here. This is a place for conversation. I'll talk about Christmas music and some related topics, sometimes by myself and sometimes with guests. If you're looking for music, just go to soundsofchristmas.com and click on the tree or the player on the front page or on the Listen Now page. We play the best variety of Christmas music all year long. Well, except in October, when we play the best variety of Halloween music. Typically, the Beatles are one of the bands people do not think of when they think about Christmas music. And plenty of people were thinking about the Beatles during the past year. There was the 3-part special on Disney Plus, The Beatles Get Back, and there was the release of the special Let It Be box set, which included lots of bonuses that fans were excited about. I know I was. And this continues into 2022 with the IMAX film of the complete rooftop concert and the release of the Get Back film on DVD and Blu-ray. Truth is, the Beatles are always popular, even when there aren't new releases, but they aren't usually top of mind when talking about Christmas music. Sure, after the breakup, there was some Christmas music. John gave us Happy Christmas, War is Over. Paul gave us Wonderful Christmas Time, which he re-recorded recently with help from Jimmy Fallon and the Roots. And about 10 years ago, he did a version of the Christmas song with Diana Krall. George had a song on his Dark Horse album called Ding Dong, Ding Dong, which is really a New Year's kind of song, not exactly a Christmas song, but Christmas adjacent. And in the 90s, Ringo released an entire Christmas album called I Wanna Be Santa Claus. And for the most part, that's it. But there were Beatles Christmas records. In the fall of 1963, the Beatles press officer Tony Barrow, who was credited with coming up with the phrase the Fab Four, came up with the idea of having the Beatles record special Christmas messages that would be sent out to members of their fan club on a one-sided flexi disc. That first one, which was simply known as the Beatles Christmas record, was about 5 minutes long, and it was scripted, having each of the Beatles give a message to their fans for something in particular that they were thankful for. There were also segments of them singing parts of Good King Wenceslas and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, though neither were complete or good enough quality to really count as a Christmas song on its own. The whole thing was simply capturing a moment in time, with the Beatles being, well, the Beatles, and all the silliness that one would expect from them in 1963. The next year, they recorded what they called another Beatles Christmas record. And this time, they sort of let fans in on the fact that what they were saying had been written out for them. Several times they laughed as they got words wrong. John talked about his recently published book and then said that there was another one coming out soon, adding, "It says here." And then he commented on someone's bad handwriting after Paul asks if he wrote that himself. In 1965, it was the Beatles' third Christmas record, which had several versions of Yesterday sung in bits and pieces throughout. In fact, at one point, they changed the lyrics to Christmas Day. Much of the same silliness present in the previous messages continued in this one. But things got different the next year. In 1966, the single was called Pantomime, Everywhere It's Christmas, and it featured skits instead of the usual messages, along with the short song Everywhere It's Christmas, which was featured a couple times throughout the record. In 1967, the single was Christmas Time Is Here Again, which featured a series of skits with each of the Beatles playing different characters in a number of different scenarios, each separated by a chorus of Christmas Time Is Here Again. The song Christmas Time Is Here Again was something that they recorded, which was a very simple song with, I think, 4 lines that were just repeated over and over and over, mainly so it could be used in this way on this Christmas single as a separator between skits. But they did do a complete version that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7 minutes long. And it's out there on bootlegs, although never officially released. And I'm sure that hardcore Beatles fans already know what I'm talking about and probably have a copy of that. While the previous 3 singles were each over 6 minutes long, the single in 1968 clocked in at almost 8 minutes. This one was called the Beatles' 1968 Christmas record, and it marked the first time that each of the Beatles recorded their parts separately. This one featured short clips of several Beatles songs, including Obla Dee, Obla Da, Your Blues, Helter Skelter, and Birthday. It also had a short clip of Tiny Tim playing Nowhere Man. In 1969, the last Christmas record went out to the Beatles fan club. This one was called the Beatles' 7th Christmas record. And like the previous one, had each of the Beatles recording their segments separately. And it was just over 7.5 minutes long. George and Ringo are actually only on it briefly. And Ringo's part is more of a promotion for his upcoming movie, The Magic Christian. For Christmas 1970, a compilation album was made out of all 7 Christmas records. But even though that was the end of the Beatles, it wasn't the end of the Beatles' Christmas music. In 1995, with the release of the Beatles anthology, a version of Christmas Time Is Here Again was released as a bonus track on the CD single of Free as a Bird. This version featured the song with clips of each of the Beatles delivering a Christmas message during the last minute or so of the song. And all of those clips came from the early Beatles Christmas records. The very first Christmas record, in a slightly abridged version, was available as bonus content in the Beatles Rock Band game in 2009. It was available in the iTunes store about a year later for a limited period of time. In December of 2017, Capitol Records released a box set of all 7 Christmas singles with the original artwork, and each record was on colored vinyl. The box set also came with a booklet with pictures and copies of the original fan club newsletters. The price on it fluctuates between $150 and $200. And as I'm recording this near the end of January, Amazon claims to have 5 copies left. I'm pretty sure when those are gone, that will be that, except for places like eBay, where you're apt to pay a lot more. The Beatles' Christmas records aren't for everyone. There are lots of bad reviews on Amazon from people who didn't know what they were buying and instead were expecting to hear the Beatles singing various holiday tunes instead of hearing them fooling around in the studio, being silly, and for the most part, being the Beatles. I play some of these from time to time on the Sounds of Christmas station. I feel like it's nice to hear those 4 guys who, especially at the time, were the best of friends, if not brothers. They're ridiculous and sincere, and I think they're a reminder that Christmas and Christmas music can be fun and can also be grateful. That's not a bad message at Christmas, or at any time of the year, really. Thanks so much for listening, helping me share some Christmas spirit, and for helping this podcast continue to grow. Since you're listening to this now, you've obviously found us somewhere. But if there's another site you like to use for podcasts, check out our podcast page on our website for the complete list of everywhere you can listen to the Sounds of Christmas podcast. And the website is soundsofchristmas.com. Then just click on the podcast tab. For the Sounds of Christmas station, to listen to the music, you'll need to stick with our website or our app in the Google Play Store. If you have comments or suggestions, feel free to reach out to me on social media or through the website. Thanks again. And may you always believe in Santa Claus.